I'm going to order the panel in the order that they have arrived on my screen. And so what I'm going to ask each of our panelists to do, and it's going to be Kathleen first, then Nick, then Paul, and then Lisa. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your organization, and I would love it as you do so if you would tell us what you think currently is the biggest challenge that inspectors are facing in this industry. So Kathleen, if you want to unmute, and we'll test your audio if you'd like to introduce yourself.
All right. Nice to see everybody. Thank you for inviting me to participate. My name is Kathleen Kuhn. I am the president of MooveGuru. MooveGuru provides a suite of services and products for the real estate and related real estate industries to help reduce the cost and hassle of moving and home ownership for homeowners. Previous to MooveGuru, I spent 35 years in the home inspection industry, having started, well, actually, I was in high school when I was booking inspections for my father's business. And then he began franchising it, and I became a franchisee in New York, eventually becoming the president and CEO of Housemaster up until selling the company to Neighborly in 2020.
Thank you, Kathleen. Nick, you're up next. Introduction, your organization, and the biggest challenge you see facing the industry. Nick, we can't hear you right now. You might need to unmute.
How's that?
There we go. That's perfect. Coming through loud and clear.
Okay, I'm Nick Gromicko. I run InterNACHI, and it's sort of a conglomerate of trade associations and for-profit companies within the inspection industry.
Great. Thank you, Nick. And what do you see as the biggest challenge facing inspectors today?
I would say healthcare is one, and inflation is another.
Okay, great. Healthcare has not come up on any of our sort of pre-questions we've solicited, so I'm going to make sure we come back around to that one later on. Paul McIntyre, quick introduction about yourself, what your organization does, and the biggest challenge facing the industry.
Yeah, hi, Paul McIntyre, president of HomeGauge. So first off, just thanks to everyone on this panel for attending. I really appreciate it. I think this day has been spectacular. You know, everyone who had any talking or you know, some of the sessions were just so helpful. So appreciate everyone for their time and effort in taking a part of this. And in terms of I think what's the industry, I think Nick made a good point on inflation. I think a lot of companies and people are being impacted by inflation specifically. I think it's been a seesaw, to be honest, right? You know, we've had a really high growth period for a period of time, and then now we're seeing the downward cycle of this, and it's impacted both by you know, such a high demand industry, like it was a seller's market, and I think that had a really negative impact on foregoing inspections. And then now you're seeing the interest rates creeping up, and that's going to have an impact potentially on home sales. So I think those are things that have to be very closely looked at.
Great, thank you, Paul. And Lisa, last but not least. Lisa, we can't hear you right now. Not yet. It was actually showing you were unmuted on Zoom, so it might be something on your computer.
Take a look.
There we go.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Dak, and thank you, HomeGauge, for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Lisa Alajajian Giroux, and I'm the incoming 2023 president of the American Society of Home Inspectors. We've been around since 1976. I think all of you hit on a lot of the major points of what we're dealing with right now. Healthcare is number one. Members are looking for healthcare. The downward swing in the market. I know my business alone has lost 35% this year because of the lack of inspection contingencies. So we're trying to, at this point now, just trying to help our members make a living, try to get them the education they need to help them craft their business, try to, with our online learning portal, trying to teach them ways of saving money, such as some of the classes I've heard about today. Other than that, I'm grateful to be here, and I'm glad to meet all of you, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation of how we can make the profession better.
That's great. I'm going to ask you a question, Lisa, about some of those points, and then come to you, Nick, because as the representatives of the two big trade bodies, we can all look at data about inflation. We can all look at data around number of property transactions that are happening, and we can all see data around what has happened over the last 4 or 5 months with regards to waived inspections. But of course, the actual data from on the ground is really what helps. Over the last few months, Lisa, what have you heard from your members, and what do you think the current state of this inspection contingency or inspection waiving is looking like?
Yeah, this has been definitely a draw on all of our businesses. I get calls from inspectors every day telling me they're either going out of business, taking a part-time job, full-time job. I actually got a couple of referrals from people that are no longer in business. The average inspector in Massachusetts is down a minimum 35%. And I'm starting now to see, as of this week, post inspections. The phone is ringing, beginning to ring. I bought a house, I moved in, now I want to do the home inspection. So I'm really curious to see what happens at this point.
And Nick, what are you hearing from your members?
Well, mostly thank yous for, creating programs that allow them to make more money when the market turns down. We have 45 different ancillary services we have certifications for. And so we're pushing all our members to do more inspections for each client and ways to sell those. We're working with contractors now. InterNACHI owns the Contractor Association. So, and last week we launched overseeit.com, where our inspectors can go and look at remodeling projects while they're going on. One of the biggest complaints Americans have is with contractors, not with inspectors.
But Nick, hang on, I just want to stop you there. So the question around, though, are you hearing from your members that the number of inspections being waived is as high as it was a few months ago, or are you hearing that it's going down?
No, when there's fewer inspections and it's not a hot market, fewer people waive inspections because they don't have to. There aren't that many buyers competing for the same property.
Right. Okay, thank you. Now, Paul, you obviously with HomeGauge also see data around trends in inspections. I know we had a lot of conversations 4 months ago, of course, to sort of Nick's point around how the market's changed. The waiving of inspectors was a lot higher. HomeGauge data showing the same thing about a reduction in that problem?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty consistent. We've done analyses across just all of our customer bases and just seen, just in general, the average customer certainly has been impacted. I am hopeful that, to Nick's point, that, as the market shifts and it does become more of a buyer's market, that we'll see actually a net positive impact that would happen based off of that. I'm hopeful of that. But, obviously we're probably, if we're there, we're right there.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Dax, I'd love to add something now, not necessarily from my MooveGuru days, but since I'm probably the oldest person on the panel, unfortunately,
I have you beat.
Yeah, I might have you beat.
I will say that, I've been involved in the industry through many downturns, significant downturns from, early 90s, 2008. And I will say that what we always saw was, as the market turned down and prices, rose or interest rates rose, it was a reminder to the consumer that this investment is a very, very big investment, and it tend to create more of a buyer beware mentality again, which ultimately was a positive for the inspection industry.
That's actually an interesting point, because I've actually talked to Russell too, who obviously the founder of HomeGauge, and he, when we were having these conversations, even about 2008, if some people are old enough to remember that, and the financial crisis that happened and the real estate crisis that happened in that time frame, I asked him how it impacted HomeGauge business, and he actually said kind of similar things, which is actually in a downturn, what ends up happening a lot of times, you get people who foreclose and have to put their property up, and what ends up happening is you're going to make sure you're going to get an inspection on a foreclosed property. So, so I think, that's why it's like, it's interesting. It's almost like an inverse, potentially of, when the economy's down, the inspection industry or community might actually see somewhat of an improvement. So I'm hopeful that I don't want people to have their homes foreclosed upon, obviously, but an upswing in the market.
Yeah,
I mean, it's only a downturn for home inspectors who are waiting for a real estate agent to call them to do a home inspection for a buyer on a house. If that describes you, then yeah, you're going to have a downturn. But I'm hoping there's very few of you out there.
It's a great point. I mean, Mark Hummel earlier presented, right, on operating as an inspector in a down market. There's been a couple of comments or questions that people have submitted already around them doing different types of inspections, post-closing inspections. Nick, you were starting to talk earlier about different types of inspections or work that inspectors can learn to do. Down market, then, if they're not sitting around and waiting for those inspectors, what are the top 1 or 2 things that those more proactive inspectors are out there doing to ride this out?
Well, we're trying to work more and more with contractors, and we're trying to get the contractors, especially roofing contractors, to use our tools as a sales tool for them. And that tool consists of having a third-party InterNACHI member look at the project prior to the consumer writing the final check to the contractor. One of the biggest problems in selling as a contractor, I'm a contractor myself, is trust. And this really is a win-win-win for both the contractor, his sales team, for the consumer who's sometimes worried that the project didn't go right, or maybe it was done wrong, and they're hesitant about writing the final check, maybe even too shy not to write it. And then of course it's a win for InterNACHI members who are doing the inspections. Remember, there's sort of psychological pressure placed on a contractor when they're alerted up front that an InterNACHI member is going to sort of look over their shoulder on this project. That makes the project going correctly most of the time. It eliminates complacency, but also it really helps with the peace of mind for the consumer at the end, especially if they're doing a big project like a kitchen remodel, an addition, or a roofing project.
It's an interesting point because we're going to talk about the topic of data in a few minutes, because it is the most asked question, particularly with a conference that has been organized by HomeGauge, because obviously HomeGauge is ownership from several years ago by an insurance company. So data is a big topic, and we're going to come on to that for those of you submitting questions. But there's sort of, I think, a nice bridge to that in part, because lots of parts of this industry, a MooveGuru, an AmFam insurance company, or any other insurance company, a HomeGauge, would make the argument that what is trying to happen in this industry is that everybody's trying to align themselves with the interests of the inspector to ultimately help the home buyer. And what you're talking about, Nick, is a type of inspection or a type of checkup, if we don't want to sort of use a legal inspection word there, because people want those sorts of things verifying before they write the check. And it ties in with the fact we hear from lots and lots of people across the industry that the knowledge of home ownership and home maintenance is decreasing quite significantly. We're not teaching our children as much about how to maintain. And so I suppose, Paul, I'll ask you the question of, there is a lot of data floating around in this industry. How can that help alleviate this issue, not necessarily just for when a major project is being done, but also after that, and just the general day-to-day, year after year maintenance and monitoring of what's happening with the home?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, in coming from an insurance perspective, even though I don't have an insurance background, the reality is, like, nobody wants their home to get damaged or be damaged, right? And so I think the goal, from my perspective on data, is really around mitigation. It's around how can we help home buyers understand what real risks are, and how can they not get them mitigated, but get them to actually not happen. Like the examples of, trees that are dead that are very close to the house, and those are real potential issues that if something bad happens would have catastrophic damage not only on the house but potentially on the family. And so these are things I think that there's actually alignment in, at least in the insurance industry and the inspection industry, is really about how can we educate, how can we get people to understand that there's acute issues, and the inspection is a great example of being able to help showcase what is potentially wrong with the house. But then there's also the ongoing, how do we mitigate this risk, and how do we make sure that this is a safe home for the long term, so that you don't have to pay your whatever your deductible is on your home insurance, or you don't have to be taken out of your home for a extended period of time because your roof is gone, or those types of things are really impactful, and they're mutually beneficial to everyone involved.
It's an interesting point made, because I think there can be a misconception that an insurance company is in the business of wanting to deny claims. And I now know more over the last few years about the insurance industry than I ever wanted to know. And I hope one day that can all fall out the other side of my head. What I have learned, though, is, of course, an insurance company is in the business of paying legitimate claims, because if they didn't pay, that would be well known, and you therefore would never go get insurance from that company. So they have no interest in denying legitimate claims. Fraudulent claims, sure. But if they can reduce risk, then they can reduce premiums, which makes them more of a relevant and competitive insurance company.
And the biggest risk reduction strategy is the mitigation of the risk itself. So, and that's where we are, trying to help steer our ability to be able to do that. And so that's really the end goal here. And you're right, it's and obviously we're dealing with this in Florida, right? And so they want to pay these out, they need to pay these out. People are relying on this to happen. And so this is, and when you have a very good experience with someone, that goes a long way.
Okay.
So I think to add to that, anything that can help create or reduce or eliminate the perception that the purpose of the home inspection is to renegotiate the price of the home is incredibly useful.
Point.
When the inspection first started, it was not about negotiation. It was about the education of the home. I need to understand what I'm going to buy. It has become, and this is one of the reasons that during the market changed, people stopped getting a home inspection, because the perception was, if I can't negotiate, I don't need it. So anything and I think that's a very important need for the industry, is to create the ability to define the inspection as more than the ability to negotiate.
Jack, if I could add in on that. Kathleen and Paul make very, very good points. The most important part of the home inspection is the education of the client, to help them mitigate those risks, to help explain the home to them and what they need to do to maintain it, to help them better understand what they're getting into and things that they can do to reduce their risks of having to leave because of a hole in the roof or a roof leak or anything crazy like that. Paul, I think you mentioned something about, the homeowners insurance. I would love for a group like this to entertain a conversation with the home insurance industry on how home inspectors can actually work hand in hand, and we can help them reduce the risk by performing some kind of spot inspections, whatever they need. I would love to I know we're getting together to make the profession better. I'm so excited about that. I'm so glad Dak put this group together, because these are things, why can't we work hand in hand with an association like that and put all the resources of the thousands and thousands of home inspectors we have in all trades here to work? When COVID hit, I had to pivot. I had to go elsewhere. I had to do other things. I did some insurance inspections. I took pictures of homes for insurance companies. I did whatever I needed to do. I pushed more on my radon business, and I'm seeing more people pivoting. And eventually, maybe we can develop stronger alliances with other organizations and help them do specific inspections, like Florida does pre-drywall inspection.
Right.
That's the type of things we should be looking at.
Agreed. But Lisa, I just want to throw an interesting question back to you of, I agree. I think that when I hear my friends talk about their homes, when problems pop up, whatever, a lot of them really have no idea where to even begin.
Right.
And sometimes now, having been in the periphery of the home inspection industry for 3 years or so, I now know things that I wouldn't have known. And I go around to people's houses and I'm like, oh, particularly after that moisture session we had this.
Oh, I know, right?
I think everybody, one of us who's not an inspector, went outside and took a picture of our flashings and our roofs and started to worry. One of the counter arguments that parts of the industry make is, on the surface, those inspections sound like a great idea. Does it not create a problem, though, of giving the homeowner a list of things that they now know are wrong with their home that might not have come up in a transactional inspection, and therefore they would have to legally declare? How do we factor that in?
That's an interesting question. We have to educate them what a home inspection is. So if the home inspection is performed and all of a sudden the insurance company decides to do an insurance inspection and something comes up, they're not going after the home inspector because they had to miss this. Why didn't they tell me about this? We have to educate the consumer what a home inspection is and whatever other inspection we're doing. My clients in Massachusetts appreciate knowing, especially when a tear down is 1.2 million. They appreciate knowing what they need to do, come up with a game plan. Tell me what needs to be repaired. Give me a priority list. Help me better understand my home. Where in Florida, if they have a home for 200,000, that client may not want that detail. So I think it's going to be specific to the area that we're practicing business in. But in my area, something like this would be very much welcomed.
I also think, and we're not there yet. I think this is definitely a futuristic conversation, but
Yes.
I love the idea of, there's so much information that we have, but there's also so much information that insurance companies have. And how can we create a symbiotic relationship between both parties? Because, there's examples on our side where, they were able to diagnose like an issue within a certain geographic location in like Atlanta area, where there was like multiple subdivisions that had properly installed flashings on their deck, and it caused leaking in, like 70% of the homes. And like, how can we provide that information back to the inspection community so that like people can be more thoughtful and because like sometimes you can't see these things. They're not easy to detect. And so how can we give people better tools to be able to provide, better insight as well?
So sort of pre-arm them with that
possibly
data
yeah, right?
Of a known issue. That's
Yeah.
interesting. I do think one of the most fun things I've seen in this industry is Nick's House of Horrors, the 4 or 5 locations of those now. I think they're a lot of fun to see, particularly for me, who's not an inspector, and that was a pretty cool experience. I wonder, Nick, if what Paul and the others are describing there is something that, as inspectors are going around a House of Horrors training, that information can be presented to them some way that says, on this is what what the insurance industry sees from a claims point of view. Is that already built in some way?
Yeah, and mostly that came from the fact that we do these inspections already for every shingle that falls off a house. If shingle on Lisa's house falls off tonight, and she calls Home Depot or Lowe's or a contractor, an InterNACHI member goes out, grabs that shingle, sends it to our laboratory. We decide who manufactures the shingle. We can look at the shingle, decide whether it was installed right or wrong. Then we get it back to the manufacturer. We do that for Olive Owens Corning. We do tens and tens of thousands of those inspections. So we're already working on that part of the industry already, and have for about a decade.
That's interesting. That it is at the moment, I think, Nick's example aside, because Nick's example is very much more about sort of, it feels like a two-way flow of data. I think to everyone else's points, at the moment, an inspector generally performs an inspection, and then there is a one-way flow of information to the seller and ultimately to the buyer for them to make decisions as well, and to some degree to the realtor. But I don't believe the realtor is really doing a lot with that information unless they're going to deal with that home again. The idea, though, of feeding that information back up the chain. so that that information is available in the hand of the inspector right when they're doing it is compelling. I mean, Switch, that kicked off our conference this morning and talked about scanning appliances, even that is the beginning of that sort of two-way data transaction, right? Where you scan a panel of an appliance and it's going to tell you something.
I'd also like to tell anybody listening to me that I can assure you that homeowners insurance companies want to pay claims. They're not trying to use our industry to get out of paying claims. The more claims they get out of, the less money they make. I know that seems absurd, and I could explain it to you, but it would take 20 minutes, and I'm not going to do it. But if you want to do it on InterNACHI's message board, I'll do it for you. But there's no insurance company, homeowners insurance company, including AmFam, in the world that wants data from home inspectors so that it can avoid paying claims. It doesn't cost them anything to pay a claim when you really think about how it all works with reserves and everything. And one of the reasons insurance companies are fighting self-driving cars is because self-driving cars don't end up in fender benders. They want to have claims come in. They want there to be losses. Without them, they don't exist. So to not pay them would be a faster route to their extinction. So I just want to support Paul in his statement that, you know, AmFam would not be doing any of this to try to get out of a claim.
No, that's quite right. I mean, you will, if you look across the insurance industry overall, you will see a pivot, right, of less people wanting to be exposed to auto insurance and more people wanting to play in the home insurance space, right? For that exact reason. Self-driving cars will decimate ultimately probably the auto insurance industry. I don't want to drift away yet from the topic of data, because I'm going to get accused as a moderator of letting some of our panelists off light if we don't sort of dive into this a little bit more, because it was the most requested topic in the run-up to the panel. Kathleen, I'm going to come to you for a moment first, and then you, Paul. MooveGuru provides a service essentially that connected the home buyer to a number of services. There is a passing of data, of information to a degree there, including, of course, the contact information of the person of buying the home. Talk to us a little bit about, if you will, as to what that data ecosystem looked like, how that operated under you, and what sort of inspectors should know, or what misconceptions should be cleared up there.
Well, the misconception is that the data goes anywhere beyond our services. So all of our clients come to us, our mover clients come to us from relationships with home inspectors, realtors, loan officers, and that's a trusted relationship. Everything that we do is branded to that individual, that company, and obviously their number one concern is the privacy. So we only use that data to reach out to the consumer, to connect those utilities, you know, to get them the branded discounts on their moving, and now also with a home ownership portal. But again, the number one question we get is, do you use that information for anything else? No. And I think that's absolutely critical. I think, you know, everybody in the industry knows the company that does not make that promise, or actually they make a relationship, or they make a offer so that we're going to get that data, we're going to use it, you know it, you don't then have to pay for the software. That doesn't sit well necessarily with the industry. So I think it's a great question. But beyond that, I think, not to change the topic, I do think as we're talking about data, we have to talk about what's going on in the real estate technology space, which is real estate technology is moving towards not just real estate related platforms, but consumer facing platforms. And they're going to want to look at home inspectors to be integrated with those platforms so that the data does flow to those platforms. And those platforms can help consumers stay connected with their realtors and manage their home long-term. I know that's a lot. Sorry to throw it out there.
No, that's okay. And the point about what can and can't happen with data is a very different conversation to where this industry was, as every industry was, as recent as 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. Because what has happened over the last decade, and really the last 5 years in particular, is an incredible amount of extremely strict data laws that have been brought into play. My last world was building marketing technology, and to watch those laws come into play and how it really brought everybody into line in every industry, whether you're a supermarket with a loyalty card or a home inspection software industry company, is a big difference. The fines, the punishments, etc., are out of this world. So any organization, it is my understanding, that chooses to play in a world that involves the use of anybody's data has to choose to be a good company, because if they don't, these things are going to bite them. Paul, I know a lot of the questions we got around data were obviously in relation to HomeGauge, given a lot of HomeGauge customers are part of this industry day to day. When we think about data and HomeGauge, what's the sort of one thing that you think people should understand about it, and what's the benefit to the home buyer from the data that exists?
Right. Yeah, I mean, a couple things specifically. I think number one, as a company who is owned by a large organization, we do need to be very publicly compliant, or whatever the word is, but with what we say and do with the things that we have. And so ensuring that we are, like, we have privacy policies, we have language, we have things that we say that says what we can and cannot do. We have to strongly abide by those. And so we actively, regularly make sure that, like, the things that we want to do or want to do in the future are explicitly presented in our privacy policies, and that people can view them and they can understand what we do and do not do. As a kind of high level, vision, I don't know if you want to call it vision, but just overarching kind of theme that we like to ensure of internally is really this concept of what we call explicit consent, which means I think Kathleen kind of touched on this, where it's we want to make sure that what we are presenting to people is A, of value, and B, is their choice. And that's kind of what the market, from a compliance perspective, from a lot of the laws that are very strict, as you said, are ensuring people adhere to. And so this concept of explicit consent is really ensuring that, whatever we do, it's on the customer's behalf, that they are willing and able and wanting of the services of which, are being presented to them. And then they're not being communicated for things that they didn't consent to, essentially. And that has been a pretty mainstream kind of model that we've followed internally at HomeGauge.
There is, I think, so that Kathleen and Paul, they were talking about the explicit side of data, right? You have to have explicit consent, otherwise no one can do anything anyway. It has to be clear explicit consent. So right at the beginning when HomeGauge started this, I know Paul took some flack because some people didn't like the way the question was being asked to people, etc. And so that got made clearer, etc. And we moved past that. But there is this whole other element to it, which I personally don't think the industry talks about enough, which is when somebody gives consent with data, and I'm thinking a bit back to my marketing days, if you tick that box that says, yes, I'm interested in it, right? King Soopers is my local supermarket. If I go online, sign up for their loyalty card, I tick it, they will say, I am agreeing to blah, blah, blah. And it will say terms and conditions, privacy policy, and probably King Soopers will say receive offers, receive discounts, receive coupons. I know that is what I'm opting into King Soopers for. They cannot now suddenly start sending me things that are nothing to do with King Soopers. And there are some players in this industry, it seems, outside of everybody on this panel I checked, where the organizations are offering people to opt in for one reason, and then actually, which is sort of a benefit service, and then actually they're getting them on the phone and then they're trying to sell them something. That seems problematic. Do you have an opinion, Paul, before we wrap up on this topic around how does the industry clean that up? Like what impact is that having?
I mean, I think it's education, right? As best as you can. I mean, just understanding like what the regulations really do require, and the companies that you are engaging with to, you know, add value to your business. Are they adhering and following those? I think ultimately, I mean, you did hit the nail on the head that I think the biggest challenge, and this isn't just the inspection. I mean, if you look at other industries, you know, this happens everywhere. You know. Trying to get someone on the phone and have a conversation with them. People do nefarious things, and they do things that are not necessarily compliant. But to your point, the law specifically is, in order to be contacted as a homeowner or anybody, I guess, if you've agreed to be contacted, you have to be contacted about the services that you said yes to. So if I was being called about an insurance quote and someone calls me about solar panels, that's, you know, that is not something that is compliant today.
Okay, interesting. Nick or Lisa, anything else to add to the topic of data here in the industry before we move on?
Well, we've been around for 30 years, and long before there was anybody complaining about data, InterNACHI not only never sold any data, never gave it away, never released it, never made it available to anybody. And on top of that, it's never even run an ad. We have a 280,000 page website with 34 million unique visitors. 1 in 14 Americans go on our site. There's not so much as a banner ad on there for the past 3 decades. So you have to look at InterNACHI as what it was before there were all these compliance laws and you know, transparency laws. We were already here.
I think that's a perfectly legitimate statement. I mean, on a conversation around who does what with data and what's happening with data on the industry, I mean, it's a well-made point. Lisa, any thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, Nick's absolutely right. We never sell data. That's something that ASHI's never got involved with. Our inspectors, we don't believe in selling and, you know, giving our data to sources without our customers' explicit consent. That's been since 1976. It's just something we don't do. If our customers do not want that information to be given out, we don't give it out.
Great. I'm going to change subject a little bit. I just want to remind people the Q&A function is open. There are some questions coming in. Some of them are very, very specific, for instance, to HomeGauge software and using templates, etc. And I will ask the team to jump in and type some answers there. So we're keeping this really focused on the industry. I see a couple, one's anonymous, one Basil. I'll come back to those if the conversation steers it that way. And if not, we will sort of follow up afterwards. I'm really interested in this idea of diversification in the industry. When you think about, when we look across our customer base, I think the HomeGauge customer base is fairly indicative of both InterNACHI and ASHI's memberships. You know, it's a very white older male industry, if we're all sort of quite honest, and it's nice to have a panel here where 50% of the panelists are not. There is a drive by a lot of us, I think, here today to try and increase diversity, not only in terms of gender, but also there are a lot of people that come into this industry later in their career, whether it be post-military, post-construction and trades. Lisa, maybe you first. What are your thoughts on increasing that diversification, and what will it actually take?
Well, that's a great question, Dak. This year we started the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and the subcommittee of that is the Women in the Industry, which HomeGauge and Carla Heatherly have been a great, great resources of information. And from there, we're going to take it to I know you call them the old white men, but that's an absolutely true statement. We're going to take the Diversity and Exclusion Committee, and we're going to go as far as we need to go with it. We're going to make it all inclusive to anyone and everyone, and help them be the best they can in their industry.
I'm curious though, Nick, you mentioned right at the beginning this idea of healthcare. It's an enormous topic on everybody's mind as an American access to healthcare. Healthcare and what else is needed in order to encourage anybody, but ideally a more diversified crowd of inspectors into the industry to consider this as a career?
Well, when you said diversification, you mentioned that people get into this industry late in their career. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is that they get hurt or injured or wear out. I'm 60. I can't do the contracting work I used to do when I was even 50. So the other reason people get into this career late is because it's an advantage. Consumers don't buy home inspection reports. Sorry, HomeGauge. They just don't. They buy whiskers. They're buying experience. And so older inspectors have a slight marketing advantage over a brand new young guy who's in his 20s. So we talk about diversification, trying to get young people into it. InterNACHI, of course, has a younger base than anyone. And what we've done is we're the only school, we're the only university in our entire industry. We have the same U.S. Department of Education accreditation as Harvard and Yale. And so a kid coming out of high school, especially in this environment, when there's a sort of a movement against borrowing $200,000 to get an underwater basket weaving degree, a kid could come out of high school and actually get a formal education that's approved by the U.S. Department of Education, where the courses at InterNACHI online are all college level courses. They're accepted by other colleges. They count towards a degree, and he can start a profession earlier. Whereas before, the route was into this profession was be in the trades for 3 decades, wear your elbow and shoulder out, and then become a home inspector. And I think InterNACHI, along with the help of the federal government, as being the only accredited university in the space, is changing all that. And that's going to bring diversity in terms of more young people entering the field.
That's an interesting one, because I mean, I, as a father, some of you heard me say before, I'm going gray because I have 4 teenage daughters, and 2 of them are in that first year of university. 2 of them are thinking about what they do next. And it is a hard decision for them to make today if they are not wanting to pursue something that very much requires a specific degree of some type, whether they should go down that path or not. And InterNACHI's university is a great program. It would be great to see other parts of the industry and parallel industries starting to create those things as well. I am curious though, Nick, on the point about healthcare. Is there other big changes, though, that sort of has to happen to how an inspector typically works today that would help solve problems that would attract more people in?
Well, I don't think we want more people in. I mean, it's a rumor that I want more people in the industry. I want less people in the industry.
With more work for each inspector that's here. Yeah. Right.
And paying more of our 15 entities money. I mean, we have, the Master Inspector Certification Board, IEC2, we have Inspector Outlet, Inspector Media, all of these sell products and services to inspectors to make them better. There's nothing worse than a broke inspector. Well, maybe a broke real estate agent is worse. But, an inspector who's making a decent living, a good living, can afford to go to our convention, to buy, moisture meters and infrared cameras, to take time off to educate himself or herself, and to take time off to rest. A broke inspector running around trying to do 2 or 3 inspections a day, every day, 7 days a week, to try to make a living because he or she isn't charging enough, is what I'm trying to push out of this industry. And after years of trying all sorts of ways, I finally figured out the way to do it, which is to just raise our profession up to the level of engineers and architects by getting U.S. Department of Education accreditation for our university, and then making the university free. So
that is an interesting point.
You have no excuses anymore out there, anybody listening to me, about getting education. You have college level courses that you can take that are advanced, that are online, convenient, robust, and free.
I'm all for a pitch on free education, Nick. I also think, though, your point about elevating the inspector is interesting, because many of you noticed I probably talk a bit funny, and that's because I come from England. And in England, we don't have inspectors as such. We have the Royal Charter of Surveyors. And the role is ever so slightly different. There's a lot of nuance to it.
It's actually the Royal Institute.
Seen very, very different. Sorry, Nick.
It's the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors.
Yes, that's the
We're
one.
partners with them. So
Yeah, my country people sort of better than I do there. To the rest of the panelists, sort of similar sort of question. Are there things missing in this industry that will really help those people in it be more successful, or help those people, whether it be healthcare or something else, choose this industry who otherwise might not have?
Well, I mean, I may go out there and actually say the word that independent inspectors don't want to hear, but franchise opportunities, or any other opportunities where it's, you have a business in a box. I mean, InterNACHI, ASHI offers incredible amounts of tools to help somebody get started. But and as the proud mother of a millennial home inspector, I will tell you that I think the gray hair and the ageism of home inspectors is changing. I think the first wave of home inspectors are retiring. And we certainly saw at Housemaster a much younger and younger candidate come into the field. You're also seeing the real estate industry attract a much younger and more diverse group, because millennials and younger people go, hey, you know what? I don't see myself sitting in a cubicle 9 to 5 anymore. I'm not willing to give my life to, I want flexibility. I want control of my future. So I think it's happening, maybe not as fast as we want it to happen, but I think it is happening, because home inspections is a great career opportunity. And again, conversely, you see real estate agents getting younger and younger as well.
I like to jump in on that too. I see the same thing, Kathleen, very slowly. I'm seeing it pivot. I'm seeing younger people come in. Just an example, in my area, 60% of the licensed home inspectors are 60 years or older. And we're starting to see a younger crowd come in, like you said, younger real estate agents, absolutely. And we need to cater to them, and to cater to them and bring them into this type of business. They're looking for technology. They're looking for things that the old whisker guys aren't looking for. Just going through COVID, look what we're doing today. We never thought about this, and us older people, and I'll include myself, because I'm almost 60, we never thought about getting on and doing a Zoom call and go to meeting. This epidemic was good and bad. The good part was it made us get out of our comfort zone and do things like this. I think the last 3 years, I've learned more, and my board of directors have learned more of how to do business like this. Even my clients, I was able to pivot and say, listen, you don't need to be at the home inspection. I can go to meeting with you. I can put pictures on the screen. I can explain everything you need. And that helped me keep my business as well. But these young guys are looking for technology. They're looking for quick, fast, easy. Where us older people, we might be a little bit old school still, but we're still getting in those crawl spaces.
Sure. Paul, how does a company like HomeGauge adjust to Lisa's point there, that if we do get some of these younger people coming into the industry, they are generally much more technology focused. How does a software company like HomeGauge pivot to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's at the end of the day, I think it's really just about adding value, and how can you help someone do their job better, faster, stronger, and more intelligently. And how can we do that? I mean, Switch is a great example of hopefully being able to do that, where it is reducing the amount of time it takes, and it's adding value at the same time. I think I kind of side that, like, especially in this industry, personally, I see so much value add in the inspector themselves being the trusted person who is, communicating with the home buyer on a very stressful time in their lives. And technology is not going to solve that problem. And I think that's a great opportunity for, us as an industry to kind of leverage that, but with technology. On the diversification side, I do think, from an outsider's perspective, I guess, but I think the education is really interesting. I think getting the word out that this is actually a really interesting industry, and it's not something that I think every person, high school person, student in high school knows even exists. And so how do you do that? And I think if you can get more awareness, I probably agree to the next point too, which is like this industry is only so big and can support so many people, but at the same time, I think awareness to create diversification certainly is an opportunity. I think just the amazing, interesting side niches that we have, that also are, that people aren't aware of that they may really, really like. And like NRVIA is an amazing example of, such an amazing organization that, I didn't, like a lot of people didn't know is such a really interesting niche kind of industry. And, you get to drive around and see the whole country and be able to kind of just do inspections while you're doing that. I mean, it's so, it's so compelling that, and just how do you get that word out more? And that's.
And NRVIA is a fun example because we meet so many NRVIA inspectors when we work with their group. I didn't know the lifestyle that many of those inspectors have. I mean, that's really pretty cool, right? When we talk about COVID educating multiple generations that the work life does not need to look like it looked for the previous 50 years. RV inspection is perhaps one of the greatest examples about using the skills that you've got, hitting the road and living a very different lifestyle. We touched on the topic there of technology for a moment. What other technologies are any of you seeing being brought into the industry? And I'll throw out an example. We had one inspector right at the peak of COVID who sent us an amazing video where he had attempted to fly a drone with his teenage son through the entire property, so he didn't even need to enter it during COVID. He himself pointed out that it was obviously full of great limitations and all sorts of things, but it certainly allowed him to get a view of the home at a time when people didn't necessarily want you in the home. What technologies is anybody seeing that thinks are going to start to have an impact on this industry?
I can definitely speak to that from experience in the industry and now in the prop tech industry or real estate technology industry. The number one push you're seeing in real estate technology companies is a home ownership portal. Real estate agents have always given lip service to connecting to their consumers past the transaction. And now it's becoming really essential for them to do that and to provide some value after the transaction. And again, the major players, including MooveGuru, is offering a portal that the consumer can manage everything home. But these portals are integrated with transaction data as well. So again, long story short, we really see a push where more and more real estate companies will be requiring home inspectors to be integrated with their technologies so that all the data within the real estate transaction is at the consumer's finger, at the tip of their fingers or handy for them to use on an ongoing basis.
I think that's actually a really interesting point. I think I see kind of two things as well. One is that, and I'll kind of bucket that is like, how do you give the opportunity for the inspector to have a better longer term relationship with the home buyer ongoing? And so those are the things that, you can do post-inspection, because the post-inspection is transactional, right? And so what are some value-added technologies, services, offerings that you can give the inspector so that, they are getting that repeat customer, or they are getting the, 2-year post-inspection or 7-year post-inspection or whatever it may be. So I think that there's a real opportunity there, I think, to help the inspection community create more value through a better relationship with the home buyer. And I know there's challenges with that on the real estate side, and I understand the challenges that can present, but I do think there's opportunity.
I think that's the biggest thing ever, what you just said, Paul, to keep the inspector tied to the client year after year. I would say that's our future almost. Most, I invented a lot of programs and services for inspectors, and most of them don't work. I would say, after 30 years, I would say I'm mostly a failure at helping inspectors. I would say 95% of the ideas I came up with, you'll never know about because they don't work. But, the one we launched last week, we're bombarded with already by consumers, which is, overseeit.com, which is where the inspector comes in and works with the customer who's hiring a contractor on a big project. This inflation rate And this high interest rates are going to keep people in their houses. Nobody's going to trade their 2%, 3% mortgage for an 8% mortgage. And inflation forces money out of banks, out of cash, and into assets. And the asset most Americans have, now that they understand inflation as well as any economist on our Federal Reserve, at least, they're going to put it into their homes. And that's what they're going to do. They're stuck in their homes, they can't move, and they have to use this cash anyway, or they're going to lose 10 or 15% a year to inflation. They're going to sink it into their homes. And so this is a huge opportunity for our industry to be there to help them with all these contracting projects, many of which don't go well.
Right. And I would add to that, Nick, though, also, not just necessarily contracting jobs, but also jobs that people might undertake themselves that are of a large enough scale that they worry they might screw it up.
Do-it-yourselfers. When you think about that, I mean, even if you take out the do-it-yourselfers, there's still 12 million contractors in this country compared to 31,000 inspectors.
Right.
I mean, so this is a whale that we could take down. And, I've never had a program that I've launched in my entire life that worked that well in 8 days.
Right.
So I think our harpoon at InterNACHI hit something, and I think it's a big whale, and I think this is going to be a big part of our industry going forward.
And I think we're also seeing that too. Sorry, Dax. Like, we've talked a lot about today about, we've mentioned a couple of times on kind of helping Florida go through this process and recruiting some inspectors to help do some adjusting inspections and stuff like that. Well, a large chunk of that kind of strategy or that idea that was presented to us is also to ensure proper construction, right? That in times like these, this is where a lot of people take advantage. Yep. And how do we mitigate that so that like these houses that were extremely damaged. My sister lived in Englewood, so she's dealing with it personally. And so, how are they going to build their house back in a way that is going to survive the next Cat 5 hurricane? And if you don't have someone overseeing this in a way that, someone with a trained eye might not see, then you're opening yourself up for risk and more future claims and more future damages. So
that's a fascinating example because it's also when people are at their lowest moment.
I know,
right? They are deeply emotionally affected, short-term, long-term. They are hoping that they get some sort of payout in enough of a shorter period of time to start to pick their lives back up. They are probably going to be at a point, I would imagine, thankfully I haven't had to experience it, I would imagine they're at a point where they're just happy to see probably construction start in some form or another, and probably aren't laser focused while trying to put their lives back together on exactly how it's being done. Seems like the best shy.
Many consumers are just shy. I mean, my own neighbor, before the project was done, the contractor said, well, I need all the money up front. I mean, and she was too shy to say no. I mean, a third party inspector on a project can also take some of that heat. You can point to them and they say, no, you're not going to, I've advised my client not to make final payment yet until this, and this are done yet.
Right. That's a valid point. If I can jump in. What Nick just said, a lot of our clients, they don't have a voice. They don't know how to project themselves, and they look for a third party like ourselves at the home inspection or the third party inspection to be their voice. So I'm finding all this conversation very helpful, and it's great that we're working together on this and discussing these things. These are all great things that we can work together in the future to make this industry stronger. And that was a great point Nick just made about the third party being that voice saying, no, you're not going to get the money until the job gets done, because we know what's going to happen. The taillight warranty, right? Yeah, basically, they're going to leave and they're not going to come back. And we can be that voice for the consumer.
This seems like a great place for us to wrap up, and we are pretty much exactly on time here. Nick, Paul, Kathleen, Lisa, very much appreciate the four of you coming together today for this discussion. I really like where we went. We certainly ticked off the major topics that were raised to us. We talked about data. We talked about the role of insurance companies and why they're interested in this industry, diversification, the use of data, new technology, and what this future might look like for inspectors with different types of things other than just sitting around and waiting for a realtor to call them.